The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor of the grand ballroom at the Raleigh Country Club, its golden liquid mixing with my tears and the remnants of my dignity. That was the moment everything changed, the moment my own daughter-in-law's hand met my cheek with such force that the sound echoed through the stunned silence of 200 wedding guests. My name is Carol Townsend, and I'm 66 years old. I've lived in Raleigh, North Carolina, my entire life, watching this city grow from a sleepy southern town into the bustling capital it is today. For 38 years, I poured my heart and soul into raising my son Mark, believing that love, sacrifice, and unwavering support would create the foundation for a beautiful family legacy. I was a widow at 45 when my husband Robert died in a construction accident, leaving me with a mortgage, overwhelming debt, and a 10-year-old son who needed his mother more than ever. I worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat: mornings at the textile factory, afternoons cleaning offices downtown, and evenings waitressing at Mama's Kitchen. I sold my wedding ring, Robert's grandmother's heirloom worth $8,000, to pay for Mark's college tuition. I sacrificed my retirement savings, $47,000 accumulated over 15 years, to help him start his law practice. Every penny, every sleepless night, every aching muscle was an investment in his future, in our family's future. Mark's wedding day was supposed to be the culmination of all those sacrifices. June 15th, a perfect Saturday afternoon with Carolina blue skies and magnolia blossoms perfuming the air. The venue cost $25,000, money I contributed without hesitation, despite having to take out a second mortgage on my modest home. I wore my mother's vintage navy dress, altered to fit my aging frame, and a string of pearls that had been in our family for 3 generations. Sabrina Chen Townsend, my new daughter-in-law, looked stunning in her $4,500 designer gown. At 33, she was a successful marketing executive with sharp features, calculating eyes, and a smile that never quite reached them. From the moment Mark introduced her 2 years ago, I sensed something cold beneath her polished exterior, but I buried my instincts beneath hope and maternal optimism. The ceremony was beautiful. Mark looked handsome in his charcoal tuxedo, his father's cufflinks catching the afternoon light. As I watched him pledge his love to Sabrina, my heart swelled with pride and joy. This was what I had worked for: his happiness, his success, his future. The reception began with laughter, dancing, and the warm embrace of friends and family who had watched Mark grow from a fatherless boy into a successful man. Then came the toast. I stood up, champagne glass trembling slightly in my weathered hands, ready to welcome Sabrina into our small but loving family. My voice cracked with emotion as I began to speak about sacrifice, love, and the joy of watching children build their own lives. That's when Sabrina's expression darkened, her perfectly applied makeup unable to mask the contempt that twisted her features. "Sit down, Carol," she hissed, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "No one wants to hear about your pathetic sacrifices." The words hit me like physical blows, but I continued, determined to share my joy and blessings with our guests. That's when she stood up, her chair scraping against the polished floor like nails on a chalkboard. "I said sit down!" Sabrina screamed, lunging toward me. Her manicured fingers grabbed my dress, the delicate fabric my mother had worn to her own wedding, and yanked with such violence that the vintage seams gave way with a sickening rip. "Old women belong in nursing homes, not here. You're embarrassing everyone." The slap came next, sharp, deliberate, and devastating. 200 pairs of eyes witnessed my humiliation as I stumbled backward, my cheek burning with pain and shame. Mark stood frozen, his mouth agape, not defending his mother, not saying a word. In that moment of complete devastation, something inside me crystallized into diamond-hard resolve. I straightened my torn dress, wiped the tears from my cheek, and reached into my purse. Without a word, I placed a single, elegantly wrapped gift on the head table and walked out of that ballroom with my head held high. If you're watching this story unfold and feeling the injustice as deeply as I did that day, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. I want to hear from all of you. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Your support means everything as I share this journey with you. The afternoon sun beat mercilessly on my shoulders as I walked the 3 miles from the country club to my small 2-bedroom house on Oakwood Avenue. My vintage heels, bought specifically for this special day, carved blisters into my feet with each painful step. The torn fabric of my mother's dress fluttered behind me like battle flags, a visible reminder of the war I had just declared. Neighbors working in their gardens paused to stare at the disheveled older woman limping down their street in formal attire. Mrs. Henderson from 2 houses down called out, asking if I needed help, but I simply waved and continued my solitary march. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was walking away from what should have been the happiest day of my life, yet I felt more empowered with each step than I had in years. My phone buzzed incessantly in my purse. Text after text from wedding guests, from Mark's college friends, from distant relatives who had witnessed the spectacle. I ignored them all. Let them wonder. Let them speculate. Let them choose sides. The truth would reveal itself soon enough. Reaching my front porch, I paused to look at the home that had sheltered Mark and me through our darkest times. The mortgage I had taken out to pay for his education still weighed heavily on this modest structure. $200 monthly payments that consumed nearly half my Social Security income. The paint was peeling on the shutters, the garden was overgrown with weeds I could no longer manage, and the roof leaked during heavy storms. This was what my sacrifices had bought me, a crumbling monument to maternal devotion. Inside, the silence was deafening. Photo albums lay scattered across my coffee table from the night before, when I had spent hours selecting the perfect images to share during my toast. Pictures of Mark's first day of school, his high school graduation, his law school ceremony, milestones I had funded with blood, sweat, and tears. Now they seemed like evidence in a case I was building against my own naivety. I poured myself a glass of sweet tea and sat in Robert's old recliner, the one piece of furniture I had refused to sell during our lean years. The leather was cracked and faded, but it still held the faint scent of his cologne and the imprint of his presence. If he could see what had happened today, what would he think of the woman I had become? What would he think of his son? The phone rang at exactly 6:47 p.m. Mark's name flashed on the caller ID, but I let it go to voicemail. 5 more calls followed in quick succession, each one ignored with growing satisfaction. Let him wonder. Let him worry. Let him explain to his new wife why his mother had walked out of their wedding reception without a word of explanation. At 8:23 p.m., my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see Mark's familiar silhouette, still wearing his tuxedo, but with his bow tie hanging loose around his neck. His hair was disheveled, and even through the distorted glass, I could see the confusion and frustration etched on his face. "Mom, I know you're in there. Please, we need to talk about what happened." I remained silent, my hand resting on the deadbolt I had installed after Robert's death. This house was my sanctuary, and today it would remain inviolate. "Mom, please." Sabrina was stressed. It was a big day. Emotions were running high. You know how weddings can be. "Can't we just move past this?" Move past this. As if a public humiliation, a torn dress, and a slap across the face were merely wedding day jitters. As if 38 years of sacrifice could be dismissed with a wave of his hand and a plea for understanding. "The guests are asking questions, Mom. People are talking. Sabrina's family is upset. You just disappeared, and that gift—" His voice trailed off, uncertainty creeping into his tone. "What was in that box, Mom?" Ah, there it was. The real reason for his visit. Not concern for his mother's well-being, or an apology for his wife's behavior. Not shame for his own cowardice in failing to defend the woman who had given him everything. He wanted to know about the gift. I smiled for the first time since leaving the country club. Let him wonder. Let him agonize. Let him realize that actions have consequences, and some gifts cannot be returned, exchanged, or forgotten. The doorbell rang 3 more times, followed by increasingly desperate knocking. Finally, I heard his car start in my driveway and watched through my bedroom window as his headlights disappeared down Oakwood Avenue. Only then did I retrieve the voicemail he had left earlier. "Mom, I don't understand what happened today. I know Sabrina was out of line, but she's been under so much pressure planning this wedding. Her parents spent $60,000 on this reception, and everything had to be perfect. I needed you to be there for me today, and instead you caused a scene. Please call me back." I deleted the message and turned off my phone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight was mine. Tonight, I would savor the memory of their faces when they finally opened my gift. Tonight, I would plan my next move in this game I had been forced to play. The revolution had begun, and its architect was a 66-year-old woman in a torn dress who had finally learned that respect is not given, it is demanded. The call came at 6:42 a.m. the next morning. I was already awake, sitting on my back porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise paint my neglected garden in shades of gold and amber. The phone's shrill ring shattered the peaceful morning, and Mark's name appeared on the screen with an urgency that made my heart race with anticipation. I let it ring 4 times before answering, my voice deliberately calm and measured. "Good morning, Mark. What the hell did you do?" His voice was raw, desperate, barely controlled. Gone was the polished attorney who had stood at that altar less than 24 hours ago. This was the voice of a man whose world had just crumbled around him. "I'm not sure what you mean, dear. I simply left a wedding gift, as is customary." "You know damn well what I mean. The papers, Mom. The legal documents. What you put in that box." His voice broke, and I could hear Sabrina screaming in the background, her words a blur of rage and hysteria. I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring both the bitter liquid and this moment of reckoning. "Oh, you finally opened it. I was wondering when you'd get around to that." I imagine Sabrina was quite surprised. "Surprised? She's threatening to file charges. She says you've ruined everything." The irony was delicious. Sabrina, who had humiliated me in front of 200 people, was now claiming to be the victim. But the law, as my son well knew, was a precise instrument that cut both ways. "Tell me, Mark, what exactly did you find in that beautiful silver box?" Silence stretched between us like a taut wire ready to snap. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow, defeated. "The deed to the house, the mortgage papers, all of it." "That's right. And what did those documents show?" "They showed..." He paused, and I could almost hear his lawyer's mind processing the implications. "They showed that you transferred the house to me 3 years ago, that I've been the legal owner since 2021. "Very good. And what else?" "The mortgage documents, showing that I'm responsible for all payments since the transfer date." His voice dropped to a whisper. 36 months of payments, $43,200 in total. I had spent weeks preparing those documents, working with Robert's old attorney friend, Tom Morrison, who had been appalled when I explained the situation. The house transfer had been my backup plan, a safety net I had hoped never to use. But Sabrina's cruelty had forced my hand, and now my son was discovering the true weight of responsibility. "And the other papers?" "The loan documents, showing that you borrowed against your pension to pay for the wedding, $25,000, and that, according to the loan terms, I'm listed as the co-signer and primary guarantor." There it was, the full scope of what his perfect wedding had cost, not in dollars alone, but in the sacrifice of his mother's financial security. Every detail meticulously documented, every signature witnessed and notarized. I had learned long ago that in a world that values money over maternal devotion, sometimes you had to speak the language that people understood. "I don't understand, Mom. Why would you do this? Why would you put my name on all these documents?" "Because I wanted you to understand the true cost of love, sweetheart. I wanted you to see exactly what your mother sacrificed while you stood silent and watched your wife humiliate me." Sabrina's voice erupted in the background, shrill and demanding. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. She was giving Mark an ultimatum. "She says I have to choose," Mark said quietly, "between you and her. Then choose." The words came out harder than I intended, 40 years of suppressed frustration crystallizing into 2 syllables. "But understand this, son. Whatever you choose, those debts don't disappear. That mortgage doesn't vanish because you're uncomfortable with reality. The wedding loan doesn't evaporate because your wife finds the truth inconvenient. We can't afford this, Mom. Sabrina just bought a new BMW, and we're looking at houses in North Hills. This would ruin everything." Would it? Or would it simply reveal what was already true, that your comfortable life was built on your mother's sacrifice? The silence stretched longer this time, and when Mark spoke again, his voice carried a note of something I hadn't heard since he was a child, genuine fear. "What do you want from us?" I stood up, walked to the edge of my porch, and looked out at the neighborhood where I had raised him, sacrificed for him, and loved him unconditionally for 38 years. "I want what every mother wants, Mark. I want respect. I want acknowledgement. And most of all, I want you to remember that behind every successful child is a parent who gave up their own dreams to make yours possible. And if we can't pay, then you'll learn what I learned when your father died, that sometimes love means making impossible choices and finding strength you didn't know you possessed." I hung up before he could respond, my hands trembling slightly as I set the phone aside. The first battle was won, but the war was far from over. Sabrina was cunning and ruthless, and she wouldn't surrender easily. But she had made one crucial mistake. She had underestimated the fury of a mother scorned. The revolution was no longer coming. It was here. 3 days passed in silence before the storm broke. I was watering my tomato plants when the black BMW pulled into my driveway with an aggressive screech of tires. Sabrina emerged from the driver's seat like an avenging angel, her designer sunglasses reflecting the morning light like armor. She wore a crisp white blazer and pencil skirt that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, every inch of her radiating controlled fury. Mark followed reluctantly, his shoulders hunched with defeat. Gone was the confident attorney who had charmed judges and juries. In his place stood a man caught between two powerful forces, neither of which seemed willing to yield. "We need to talk," Sabrina announced, striding across my front lawn with military precision. Her heels sank slightly into the soft earth, but she didn't slow down. "This ridiculous game ends now." I turned off the garden hose and faced my visitors with the calm dignity I had learned from decades of adversity. "Good morning, Sabrina. Mark, would you like some sweet tea? It's quite warm today." "Cut the Southern Hospitality Act," Sabrina snapped. "We both know why we're here. You've manipulated legal documents to extort money from your own son. It's pathetic, and it's going to stop." I set down my watering can and wiped my hands on my gardening apron. Manipulated. That's an interesting choice of words. "Tell me, what exactly have I manipulated?" Mark stepped forward, his voice carefully controlled. "Mom, we've consulted with attorneys. What you've done, placing my name on financial documents without my knowledge or consent, it could be considered fraud." The accusation hung in the air between us like poison gas. My own son, the child I had raised alone, the boy I had sacrificed everything for, was threatening me with legal action. The pain was so sharp and unexpected that I had to grip the porch railing to steady myself. "Fraud?" I repeated quietly. "Is that what they're calling maternal love these days?" Sabrina stepped closer, her eyes glittering with predatory satisfaction. "Love doesn't involve forging signatures or manipulating elderly parents into financial schemes." "Elderly parents?" The phrase struck me like a physical blow. I may be 66, but my mind is sharp enough to remember every sacrifice I made for this family. I walked to my front door and retrieved a manila folder I had prepared for just this moment. Inside were photocopies of every document, every canceled check, every receipt that documented my decades of financial support. I had spent hours organizing them chronologically, creating a timeline of devotion that no jury could ignore. "These are bank statements showing the $47,000 I withdrew from my retirement account to fund Mark's law practice startup," I said, handing Sabrina the first set of papers. "Here are the receipts for 4 years of college tuition, totaling $78,000. These are the mortgage payment records showing how I refinanced my house twice to pay for Mark's education." Sabrina glanced at the documents with barely concealed impatience. "Ancient history. None of this justifies what you've done." "And these," I continued, pulling out the final set of papers, "are the signatures Mark provided when I set up the house transfer 3 years ago. His signature, witnessed and notarized, agreeing to assume financial responsibility in the event of my death or incapacity." Mark's face went pale. "I thought those were insurance papers. You said it was just a precaution in case something happened to you." "It was a precaution against being abandoned by the son I sacrificed everything for." I looked directly at him, letting him see the decades of pain and disappointment that his betrayal had unleashed. "A precaution against being slapped and humiliated by a daughter-in-law who thinks love can be measured in price tags." Sabrina snatched the papers from my hands, her manicured fingers scanning the legal language with growing alarm. As a marketing executive, she understood contracts and obligations better than most people. Her face grew ashen as she realized the inescapable truth. Every document was legitimate, every signature valid, every legal requirement satisfied. "This is blackmail," she whispered. No, dear. This is accountability. I retrieved my papers and returned them to the folder with ceremonial precision. For 38 years, I was the Bank of Mark. I provided loans without interest, gifts without acknowledgement, support without gratitude. Now the accounts are being balanced. Mark found his voice, though it shook with emotion. Mom, we'll pay you back, every penny. But you have to understand, Sabrina's pregnant. The words hit me like lightning. Pregnant, a grandchild, the future I had dreamed of, the legacy I had hoped to leave. For a moment, my resolve wavered as maternal instincts warred with justified anger. Sabrina saw my hesitation and pressed her advantage. That's right. I'm 8 weeks pregnant, and this stress isn't good for the baby. If you care about your grandchild at all, you'll drop this vendetta. But even as she spoke, I noticed something in her eyes, a calculating coldness that suggested this revelation was strategic rather than emotional. The timing was too convenient, the announcement too perfectly deployed. Whether the pregnancy was real or fabricated, it was clearly a weapon in her arsenal. Congratulations, I said quietly. I hope this child will have grandparents who are treated with love and respect, not humiliation and cruelty. Then call off this legal nonsense, Sabrina demanded. Forgive the debts, transfer the house back, and we'll pretend this never happened. I looked at my son, searching his face for any sign of remorse, any acknowledgement of what his wife had done to me. Instead, I saw calculation, concern for his own comfort, fear of financial inconvenience. The debts stand, I said firmly. Every penny you owe, every obligation you've assumed. Love cannot be bought, but respect can be earned. Until you learn the difference, these documents remain in effect. As they drove away, Sabrina's car spitting gravel in its wake, I knew the real battle was just beginning. She was cunning and ruthless, and she had just played her most powerful card. But I had survived a husband's death, poverty, and decades of thankless sacrifice. I would not be defeated by a spoiled woman who mistook manipulation for strength. The war was escalating, and I was ready for whatever came next. The revelation came on a Thursday morning when my doorbell rang at exactly 9:15 a.m. Through the peephole, I saw a woman I didn't recognize, mid-40s, professional attire, carrying a briefcase and wearing the confident expression of someone with important news. My first instinct was to ignore it, assuming she was another attorney sent by Sabrina to intimidate me. But something about her posture suggested she was here as an ally, not an enemy. Mrs. Townsend? My name is Jennifer Walsh. I'm a private investigator, and I think you and I need to talk. Private investigator. The words sent a chill down my spine. Had Sabrina hired someone to dig up dirt on me? Was this part of some elaborate scheme to prove my mental incompetence or financial misconduct? I hesitated with my hand on the deadbolt, weighing my options. I'm not here on behalf of your son or daughter-in-law, Jennifer continued, as if reading my thoughts. I'm here because someone who cares about you hired me to uncover the truth about Sabrina Chen. Someone who cares about me. The phrase was so foreign after the past week of isolation and betrayal that it took me a moment to process. Who could possibly have hired an investigator on my behalf? I opened the door cautiously, studying the woman's face for signs of deception. Jennifer Walsh was exactly what you'd expect from a private investigator. Sharp-eyed, professionally dressed, and carrying herself with the confidence of someone who had seen it all. Her handshake was firm, her gaze direct, and her smile genuine enough to suggest she wasn't playing games. Mrs. Henderson from down the street saw what happened to you on the wedding day, Jennifer explained as I led her to my living room. She was horrified by how you were treated, and she decided to do some digging into Sabrina's background. What she found concerned her enough to hire me to investigate further. Mrs. Henderson, my elderly neighbor who had called out to me during my long walk home from the country club. I had barely exchanged more than pleasantries with her over the years, yet she had felt compelled to take action on my behalf. The kindness of relative strangers sometimes surpasses the loyalty of family. What did she find? I asked, settling into Robert's old recliner while Jennifer took the couch. Sabrina Chen has been married before, twice actually. Both marriages ended in acrimonious divorces involving significant financial settlements. Jennifer opened her briefcase and extracted a thick folder. Her first husband was a real estate developer in Charlotte. After 2 years of marriage, she divorced him and walked away with half of his assets, approximately $340,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. Sabrina had extracted more money from one failed marriage than I had earned in a decade of working multiple jobs, and Mark knew nothing about her marital history. Her second husband was a surgeon in Atlanta, Dr. Michael Patterson. Their marriage lasted 18 months, and the divorce settlement netted her another $180,000 plus ongoing alimony payments of $3,000 per month for 5 years. I did the quick math. Another $180,000 in immediate settlement, plus $180,000 in alimony. $500,000 from 2 failed marriages, and now she was working on her third target. Does Mark know about any of this? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. According to my research, she's been very careful to keep her past hidden. She uses her maiden name professionally and has never mentioned her previous marriages to any of Mark's friends or colleagues. As far as he knows, he's her first husband. Jennifer pulled out more documents, financial records, court filings, even photographs from society pages showing Sabrina at various charity events with her previous husbands. In each photo, she looked radiant and loving, the picture of devotion. But knowing what I now knew, those smiles seemed predatory, calculated. There's more, Jennifer continued. I spoke with both ex-husbands. They're willing to testify about her pattern of behavior if necessary. Both described similar experiences: initial charm and affection, followed by increasing demands for expensive lifestyle upgrades, then sudden personality changes and accusations of various failings. What kind of accusations? Dr. Patterson said she claimed he was emotionally abusive and financially controlling. The real estate developer, James Morrison, faced accusations of infidelity that were later proven false. In both cases, she used their guilt and desire to avoid scandal to negotiate favorable divorce settlements. I felt a mixture of vindication and horror. Vindication because my instincts about Sabrina had been correct, and horror because my son was walking blindly into the same trap that had already claimed 2 other men. There's something else, Jennifer said quietly, about the pregnancy. My blood ran cold. What about it? She claimed to be pregnant during her second divorce proceedings as well, used it as leverage to increase her settlement demands. But according to Dr. Patterson, she miscarried conveniently after the divorce was finalized and the money was transferred. The cynical manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty. To weaponize pregnancy, to use the promise of children as a tool for financial gain, revealed a level of calculated heartlessness that shocked even me. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "What does Mrs. Henderson expect me to do with this information? She thinks you deserve to know the truth about the woman who humiliated you. But more than that, she thinks your son deserves to know what he's gotten himself into before it's too late." Jennifer handed me a business card along with copies of her investigative report. "Mrs. Henderson has paid for my services, but she wanted me to make it clear that any decisions about how to use this information are entirely yours. She's not looking for gratitude or recognition. She just couldn't stand by and watch a good woman be destroyed by someone like Sabrina." After Jennifer left, I sat alone with the devastating evidence of Sabrina's true nature spread across my coffee table. The pattern was unmistakable. She was a predator who specialized in charming successful men, isolating them from their support systems, then extracting maximum financial benefit before moving on to her next target. But knowing the truth and proving it were 2 different challenges. Mark was already suspicious of my motives, and Sabrina had successfully positioned herself as the victim in our conflict. If I presented this evidence now, would he see it as proof of her deception or as evidence of my desperation to destroy his marriage? The answer came to me as I looked at the photos of Sabrina with her previous husbands. In each image, the men looked genuinely happy, genuinely in love, genuinely convinced they had found their soulmate. Just like Mark looked at his wedding. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Tom Morrison, Robert's old attorney friend, answered on the second ring. "Tom, it's Carol Townsend. I need your help with something that could save my son's life and his bank account." The revolution was about to enter its next phase, and this time I had allies. Tom Morrison's law office occupied the 3rd floor of a renovated tobacco warehouse in downtown Raleigh, its exposed brick walls and hardwood floors speaking to both history and success. At 71, Tom moved with the careful precision of someone who had spent 5 decades navigating legal minefields, his silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses giving him the appearance of a distinguished professor rather than a courtroom warrior. "Carol, I have to admit, When you called about your daughter-in-law situation, I expected typical family drama, Tom said, gesturing to the manila folders spread across his mahogany conference table. What Jennifer Walsh has uncovered is far more serious than marital discord. I settled into the leather chair across from him, my hands folded tightly in my lap. 3 days had passed since Jennifer's revelation. 3 days of sleepless nights spent wrestling with the implications of what I'd learned. The evidence was damning, but the challenge remained: how to present it to Mark without appearing vindictive. Tell me honestly, Tom, is there enough here to protect my son? He opened the first folder, revealing financial documents that painted a chilling picture of systematic fraud. Sabrina's pattern suggests what we call predatory marriage, a form of long-term financial fraud that's surprisingly difficult to prosecute because the victims often refuse to believe they've been manipulated. The legal terminology made it sound clinical, but I could see the human cost in every document. 3 men had fallen victim to the same beautiful smile, the same promises of love and devotion, the same calculated extraction of assets, and Mark was walking the same path, blind to the trap being set around him. Jennifer discovered something else, Tom continued, opening a second folder. Sabrina has been meeting regularly with a divorce attorney for the past 6 months. David Kellerman specializes in high-asset divorce cases, and his fees start at $500 per hour. 6 months? But they just got married last week. That's what makes this particularly damning. She's been planning her exit strategy since before they even set a wedding date. Look at these phone records. He handed me a stack of papers covered in highlighted numbers. 17 calls to Kellerman's office in the past month alone, including one the day before the wedding. The betrayal was staggering in its scope and calculation. While Mark had been planning their future, choosing flowers and tasting wedding cakes, Sabrina had been laying the groundwork for their destruction. Every romantic gesture, every loving word, every moment of intimacy had been a performance designed to maximize her eventual payout. "There's more," Tom said grimly. Jennifer traced Sabrina's financial activities over the past year. She's been systematically documenting Mark's assets, photographing his law office, researching his client list, even investigating your family's financial history. He showed me photographs taken from Sabrina's phone, images of Mark's diploma, his professional awards, the interior of his law office, even pictures of my house that she must have taken during family visits. Each photo represented another piece of evidence she was collecting for her eventual divorce proceedings. "She's building a case for substantial alimony based on Mark's earning potential," Tom explained. "These photos would be used to demonstrate his professional success and ability to pay ongoing support." I thought about all the family dinners where Sabrina had seemed so interested in Mark's work, asking detailed questions about his cases and clients. I had attributed her curiosity to natural interest in her fiancé's career. Now I realized she had been conducting reconnaissance for her legal team. "What about the pregnancy?" I asked. Tom's expression darkened. Jennifer was able to obtain medical records through her contacts. Sabrina saw 3 different doctors in the past 2 months seeking confirmation of pregnancy. All 3 tests came back negative. The cruelty was breathtaking. She had weaponized the promise of grandchildren to manipulate not just Mark, but me as well. For a brief moment at my house, I had wavered in my resolve, softened by maternal instincts and the hope of holding a grandchild. It had all been a lie, carefully crafted to exploit my deepest desires. "So what's our next move?" I asked. Tom leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in thought. "Legally, we have several options. We can present this evidence to Mark directly, but there's a risk he'll dismiss it as vindictive manipulation on your part. Alternatively, we can wait for Sabrina to file for divorce and use this information as a defense against her financial claims. But by then, she'll have taken everything he's worked for." "Not necessarily. If we can prove fraudulent intent from the beginning of the marriage, we can potentially void any divorce settlement and even pursue criminal charges for marriage fraud." The possibility of criminal charges brought a grim satisfaction, but my primary concern remained protecting Mark. Despite his betrayal, despite his cowardice at the wedding, he was still my son. He was still the little boy who had cried in my arms when his father died, still the young man who had promised to make me proud. "Tom, I need to ask you something difficult. If I hadn't placed Mark's name on those financial documents, if I hadn't taken action after the wedding, would you have believed this evidence?" He was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications of my question. "Honestly, I might have written it off as the suspicions of an overprotective mother. The fact that you had documentary proof of financial manipulation gave credibility to these additional discoveries. So my moment of rage, my decision to reveal the true cost of Mark's comfortable life, had inadvertently provided the foundation for exposing Sabrina's fraud. Sometimes justice arrives through the most unexpected paths. I want to confront her, I said suddenly. Before we involve Mark, before we contact the authorities, I want to look her in the eye and let her know that I know exactly what she is. Tom shook his head vigorously. Carol, that's incredibly dangerous. If she realizes her scheme has been exposed, she might accelerate her timeline. She could file for divorce immediately or even make false accusations against you to discredit your testimony. Then what do you suggest? We document everything, build an airtight case, and wait for her to make the first move. People like Sabrina are impatient. They can't maintain a facade indefinitely. When she shows her true colors again, we'll be ready. As I left Tom's office, I felt the weight of terrible knowledge settling on my shoulders. I knew the truth about the woman who had married my son, but I was powerless to act without potentially making things worse. For now, I had to watch and wait, preparing for a battle that would determine not just my family's financial future, but its very survival. The revolution had evolved into something far more complex than maternal justice. It had become a race against time to save my son from a predator who had already chosen her next victim. The call came at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night, jolting me from restless sleep. Mark's name appeared on my phone screen, and even before answering, I could hear the panic in his voice through the speaker. "Mom, I need your help. Something's happened." I sat up in bed, instantly alert. "What's wrong?" "Sabrina's in the hospital. She collapsed at home tonight. The doctors are saying it might be complications with the pregnancy, but..." His voice broke, and I could hear the raw terror of a man watching his world crumble. Despite everything I knew about Sabrina's deception, my maternal instincts kicked in. Mark was in pain, and that pain was real regardless of its source. "Which hospital?" "I'll be right there." "Wake Medical Center." "Mom, I'm scared. What if something happens to the baby? What if I lose them both?" The baby that didn't exist, I thought grimly, but I kept that knowledge to myself. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. I dressed quickly and drove through the empty streets of Raleigh, my mind racing with possibilities. Was this another calculated move by Sabrina, or had something genuinely happened? Given her history of using pregnancy as a weapon, I suspected this was all part of some larger strategy. The hospital emergency room was a maze of bright lights and antiseptic smells. I found Mark in the waiting area, still wearing the clothes he had slept in, his hair disheveled and his face etched with worry. For a moment, I forgot about our recent conflict and saw only my frightened son. "Any news?" I asked, settling into the uncomfortable plastic chair beside him. "They're running tests. The doctor said something about elevated stress levels and possible dehydration. Sabrina keeps asking for you." He looked at me with confusion. "She specifically asked the nurses to call you if something happened to her." That set off every alarm bell in my mind. After weeks of treating me as an enemy, why would Sabrina suddenly want my presence? What game was she playing now? Did she say why she wanted me here? She said she had things she needed to confess, things she needed to make right before the baby comes. Mark's voice was hollow with exhaustion and worry. "Mom, I think she's really sorry about what happened at the wedding. Maybe this crisis has made her realize what's really important." I doubted Sabrina was capable of genuine remorse, but I recognized the manipulation at work. She was using this manufactured crisis to position herself as a victim seeking redemption, probably hoping to neutralize the growing tension between us. "Mark, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before answering. Has Sabrina been acting strangely lately? Any unusual phone calls, meetings, behavior changes?" He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him mentally reviewing recent events. "Now that you mention it, she has been making a lot of calls lately. Said it was work stuff, but she always left the room when her phone rang. And last week, she asked me for copies of all my financial documents, said her new accountant needed them for tax planning." The pieces were falling into place exactly as Tom Morrison had predicted. Sabrina was accelerating her timeline, gathering final documentation for her divorce filing. This hospital visit was probably intended to create a medical record of pregnancy complications that could be used to claim emotional distress damages. "Mrs. Townsend?" A nurse approached with professional efficiency. "Mrs. Chen Townsend is asking for you. Room 247. I followed the nurse down sterile corridors, past rooms filled with genuine medical crises, toward whatever performance Sabrina had prepared. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had brought me to a place of healing to stage another deception. Sabrina lay in the hospital bed looking appropriately fragile, her makeup carefully applied to suggest illness without actually appearing unattractive. Her designer hospital gown probably cost more than most people spent on formal wear, and her hair was artfully arranged as if styled by a professional. "Carol," she said weakly, reaching out with one manicured hand. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would after everything." I approached the bed cautiously, studying her performance with new eyes. Every gesture seemed calculated, every expression designed for maximum emotional impact. "Mark said you wanted to see me. I've been thinking about what happened at the wedding, and I realize I was horrible to you. The stress of planning such a big event, the pressure from my family, the fear of not being good enough." She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "I took it out on you, and that was unforgivable. It was a masterful performance, contrite but not groveling, vulnerable but not weak. If I hadn't known about her history, I might have been moved by what appeared to be genuine remorse. But knowing what I knew, I could see the careful calculation behind every word. And now, with the baby in danger, I realize how precious family really is," she continued. "I want our child to know their grandmother, to have that special relationship that I never had with mine. The baby that doesn't exist," I thought again. "But I played my part in this elaborate theater. I appreciate your words, Sabrina. Family is indeed precious." "There's something else," she said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "I've been feeling guilty about the financial pressure we've put on Mark. The house payments, the wedding loan. I think we should find a way to relieve you of those burdens." And there it was, the real reason for this performance. She wanted me to voluntarily release Mark from his financial obligations, probably to clear the decks for her divorce filing. A generous gesture of forgiveness that would actually serve her interests by simplifying the asset division. "That's very thoughtful," I said carefully. "But those documents exist for important reasons. Perhaps we can discuss it when you're feeling better." Her eyes flashed with momentary irritation before the mask of vulnerability slipped back into place. "Of course. I just want us to be a real family, Carol. I want your grandchild to grow up surrounded by love, not conflict." As I left the hospital that night, I felt the web of deception tightening around us all. Sabrina was preparing for her endgame, using this manufactured crisis to reposition herself as a reformed woman seeking family harmony. But I had seen behind the mask, and I knew that her next move would be devastating. The revolution was entering its final phase, and I needed to be ready for whatever came next. The divorce papers arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by a process server who looked apologetic as he handed me the official documents. Sabrina wasn't divorcing Mark. She was suing me for intentional interference with marriage and demanding $250,000 in damages for emotional distress. The legal maneuvering was brilliant in its cynicism. She was positioning herself as the victim of a manipulative mother-in-law while simultaneously laying groundwork for a massive financial settlement. I called Tom Morrison immediately, my hands shaking as I read the accusations. According to the lawsuit, I had deliberately and maliciously inserted myself into their marriage through fraudulent financial manipulation and psychological harassment. The pregnancy complications were attributed to stress caused by my vindictive behavior, and she was seeking both financial compensation and a restraining order to prevent further interference. "She's escalating faster than we anticipated," Tom said grimly when I arrived at his office an hour later. "This lawsuit is designed to discredit you before we can present our evidence about her fraudulent intentions." The legal documents painted a picture of a loving newlywed driven to medical crisis by an unstable mother-in-law. Every interaction we'd had since the wedding was reframed as evidence of my mental instability and malicious intent. Even my decision to transfer the house to Mark years earlier was characterized as a controlling manipulation designed to maintain inappropriate influence over an adult child. What's our response? Tom opened a folder containing Jennifer Walsh's investigation results. "We countersue for marriage fraud and present all the evidence about her history. But Carol, you need to understand, this will destroy any possibility of reconciliation with Mark. Once we reveal what we know about Sabrina, there's no going back." I thought about my son. about the little boy who had held my hand during his father's funeral, about the young man who had graduated law school with tears of gratitude in his eyes. Despite everything that had happened, part of me still hoped for redemption, still believed that love could overcome deception. What if I just dropped everything, released him from the financial obligations, apologized publicly, let them win? Then she destroys him financially in the divorce that's coming anyway. Carol, people like Sabrina don't stop until they've taken everything. Your financial claims are actually protecting Mark's assets right now. She can't touch them while they're tied up in legal obligations to you. The twisted irony was perfect. My moment of anger after the wedding had inadvertently created the very protection my son would need when Sabrina revealed her true nature. Sometimes maternal instincts operate on levels we don't even realize. There's something else, Tom continued. Jennifer discovered that Sabrina has already filed preliminary paperwork for divorce from Mark. She's planning to serve him right after the lawsuit against you is resolved, claiming that your interference made their marriage untenable. The complete scope of her strategy was breathtaking. First, destroy the mother-in-law through litigation and public humiliation. Then, divorce the husband and claim that family dysfunction made the marriage impossible to sustain. Mark would lose his mother and his wife simultaneously, along with most of his financial assets. When do we file our response? Tomorrow. But first, there's something I think you need to do. Tom pulled out his phone and scrolled to a contact number. Jennifer found Dr. Patterson, Sabrina's second ex-husband. He wants to speak with you directly. An hour later, I sat in the coffee shop on Glenwood Avenue, waiting for a man I'd never met, but whose story might save my son. Dr. Michael Patterson was younger than I'd expected, mid-40s, with prematurely gray hair and the tired eyes of someone who had learned hard truths about human nature. He carried himself with the careful dignity of a man rebuilding his life after devastating betrayal. Mrs. Townsend, I want you to know that what I'm about to tell you comes from a place of genuine concern. I don't want to see another family destroyed by the same person who nearly destroyed mine. Over the next hour, he told me his story. The whirlwind romance, the perfect wedding, the gradual isolation from friends and family. The way Sabrina had slowly turned him against his own parents, creating crises and conflicts that forced him to choose between his wife and his support system. The fake pregnancy that had kept him from filing for divorce when he first discovered her financial manipulations. She has a gift for finding successful, kind men who've experienced loss, he explained. Men who are grateful for love and willing to overlook red flags because they're afraid of being alone again. I was 2 years out from my first wife's death when I met Sabrina. I was vulnerable, and she knew exactly how to exploit that vulnerability. How did you finally break free? My ex-mother-in-law, from my first marriage, hired an investigator just like you did. She presented me with evidence I couldn't ignore. But by then, Sabrina had already extracted most of my assets and was planning her exit strategy. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. These are copies of everything from my divorce case. Financial records, recorded phone conversations, even video evidence of her meeting with her attorney while she was still pledging her love to me. I want you to have them. The documentation was extensive and devastating. Here was proof of the same pattern, the same calculated deception, the same methodical destruction of a marriage for financial gain. Most importantly, it established Sabrina's modus operandi in legal terms that no court could ignore. Why are you helping me? I asked. Because I recognize the woman your son married, and I know what she's capable of. More than that, I recognize the mother trying to protect her child. My own mother tried to warn me about Sabrina, and I dismissed her concerns as jealousy and interference. I lost 2 years of my life and most of my assets because I was too proud to listen. That evening, I sat in my kitchen surrounded by evidence of Sabrina's predatory history. 3 failed marriages, 3 devastated men, millions of dollars in fraudulent settlements, and now she was preparing to add Mark to her list of victims. I picked up my phone and dialed my son's number. Whatever happened next, he needed to hear the truth from me before he heard it in court. Mark, I said when he answered, we need to talk. There are things about Sabrina you need to know, things that will change everything. Can you come over tonight? The final confrontation was at hand, and this time, I had the truth as my weapon. Mark arrived at my house at 9:30 p.m., his face etched with exhaustion and confusion. The past week had aged him visibly. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his confident demeanor replaced by the uncertainty of a man whose world was crumbling around him. He stood on my front porch like a stranger, unsure whether he was welcome in the home where he had grown up. "Come in, sweetheart," I said gently, using the endearment that had comforted him through childhood nightmares and adolescent heartbreaks. Despite everything that had happened between us, he was still my son, and nothing could change that fundamental truth. He settled into Robert's old recliner while I prepared tea, both of us moving carefully through the rituals of hospitality, as if they were negotiations in a fragile ceasefire. The manila folders containing evidence of Sabrina's deception lay on my coffee table like unexploded ordnance, waiting to detonate the last remaining fragments of his marriage. "Mom, before you say anything, I need you to know that Sabrina's been in and out of the hospital 3 times this week. The doctors say the stress is affecting her pregnancy, and they're concerned about potential complications." His voice carried the weight of genuine fear and guilt. I can't keep fighting this battle between the 2 most important women in my life. I sat across from him, my hands folded in my lap, choosing my words carefully. "Mark, what I'm about to tell you will be difficult to hear, but I need you to listen with an open mind, because your future, your financial security, your emotional well-being, possibly your freedom, depends on understanding the truth about the woman you married." He tensed immediately, defensive walls rising. "Mom, if this is another attack on Sabrina, this isn't an attack. This is evidence." I opened the first folder and handed him Dr. Patterson's divorce records. Sabrina has been married twice before. Both marriages ended in substantial financial settlements that she obtained through fraudulent claims and manufactured crises. Mark stared at the documents with growing horror. Marriage certificates, divorce decrees, financial settlements, all bearing Sabrina's signature and photograph. The woman he had believed was his first love had already perfected her predatory techniques on 2 previous victims. "This can't be real," he whispered, his lawyer's mind automatically checking dates and details for inconsistencies. "She told me I was her first husband. We talked about how special it was that we were both starting fresh. Look at the dates, Mark. Her second divorce was finalized only 6 months before she met you. She was trolling for her next target while the ink was still wet on her settlement check." I handed him the private investigator's report, watching his face grow pale as he absorbed the full scope of Sabrina's deception. The phone records, the financial documentation, the testimony from previous victims. It painted an undeniable picture of systematic marriage fraud. "The pregnancy," he said suddenly, his voice hollow. "She said the stress from our family conflict was threatening the baby." I pulled out the medical records Jennifer had obtained. "There is no baby, Mark. She's been faking the pregnancy from the beginning, just like she did during her second divorce. It's all part of the pattern. Create emotional leverage to prevent the husband from thinking clearly about financial decisions." The silence that followed was devastating to witness. I could see him mentally reviewing their entire relationship, searching for signs he had missed, reconstructing conversations and intimacies through the lens of this terrible new knowledge. The woman he had pledged his life to was not just unfaithful, she was a professional predator who had selected him as her next victim. "Why?" he asked finally. "Why would someone do this?" "Because it works. Because good men like you, men who've been raised to be honorable and trusting, make perfect targets. You want to believe in love, in second chances, in the possibility of building something beautiful with someone special. She exploits those very qualities that make you a good person." Mark stood up abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the neighborhood where he had grown up. "The lawsuit against you? That's part of it too, isn't it? She's trying to isolate you from anyone who might recognize her true nature. Once she discredits me and forces you to choose between us, she'll have you completely under her control. Then comes the divorce filing, the claims of emotional damage, the demand for substantial settlement based on your earning potential." He turned back to face me, and I saw something in his expression that broke my heart, the look of a child who had just discovered that monsters were real. "How long have you known?" "I started suspecting at the wedding, but I only got proof after she filed the lawsuit. A neighbor hired a private investigator because she was concerned about how you were being manipulated. Mrs. Henderson? She saw what Sabrina did to me at your wedding, and she recognized the signs of an abusive pattern. Mark, there are people in this world who care about you, who want to protect you, who see clearly what I couldn't convince you to see." Mark returned to the recliner and buried his face in his hands. God, Mom, what have I done? I chose her over you. I let her humiliate you at my own wedding and said nothing. I threatened you with legal action to protect a woman who was planning to destroy me. You fell in love, or what you thought was love. There's no shame in that. How do we stop her? I opened the final folder, Tom Morrison's legal strategy for countering Sabrina's lawsuit and exposing her fraud. We fight back. We present all of this evidence in court. We protect your assets through the financial obligations you assumed, and we make sure she doesn't get the chance to do this to anyone else. The house transfer, the wedding loan, the mortgage payments. You were protecting me even when I hated you for it. I was protecting my son. I didn't understand the full scope of the threat, but I knew something was wrong. Sometimes a mother's instincts operate on levels deeper than conscious thought. Mark looked around the modest living room where he had spent his childhood, seeing it perhaps for the first time through adult eyes. The sacrifices I had made, the dreams I had deferred, the love I had given without reservation. It was all documented in the worn furniture, the faded photographs, the modest surroundings that had nurtured him into the successful man Sabrina had targeted. "Can you forgive me?" he asked quietly. "There's nothing to forgive. You're my son, and I love you unconditionally. But now, we need to work together to make sure she doesn't destroy everything you've worked so hard to build." As we sat planning our legal strategy late into the night, I felt the first stirrings of hope I'd experienced since that terrible wedding day. The revolution had come full circle, and finally, my son and I were fighting on the same side. The courthouse steps were slick with morning dew as Tom Morrison and I arrived for what would become the final battle in this family war. 6 months had passed since that devastating wedding day, and today, Judge Patricia Williams would hear our countersuit against Sabrina Chen for marriage fraud, attempted extortion, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. Mark stood beside us, no longer the confused and manipulated man who had chosen his wife over his mother. The past months of legal discovery had revealed the full extent of Sabrina's deception, and he had thrown himself into building our case with the same determination he had once shown in defending his marriage. "Are you ready for this?" Tom asked as we climbed the granite steps toward justice. "I've been ready since she slapped me at that wedding reception," I replied, straightening my shoulders and lifting my chin with the dignity I had learned from 6 decades of facing life's challenges. Inside the courtroom, Sabrina sat with her attorney, David Kellerman, looking every inch the victimized young woman she pretended to be. She wore a conservative navy suit and minimal makeup, projecting an image of understated vulnerability. Even now, knowing everything I knew about her true nature, I could see how she had fooled my son and 2 other good men. But today, the mask would finally come off. Tom stood to present our opening statement, his voice carrying the authority of 5 decades in courtrooms across North Carolina. "Your Honor, what we have before us today is not a simple family dispute, but a case of systematic fraud perpetrated by a woman who has made a career of targeting successful men for financial exploitation. Over the next 3 hours, we presented our evidence methodically and devastatingly. Jennifer Walsh testified about her investigation. Dr. Patterson described his own victimization, and financial experts traced the pattern of Sabrina's fraudulent enrichment across 3 marriages. Most powerfully, Mark himself took the stand to describe how he had been systematically isolated from his family and manipulated into financial decisions that would have left him vulnerable to her eventual betrayal. "I want the court to understand that my mother's actions after the wedding weren't vindictive. They were protective," Mark testified, his voice steady and clear. "She saw something I was too blind to recognize, and she took steps to prevent my financial destruction even when I hated her for it." Sabrina's defense crumbled under the weight of evidence. Her attorney tried to portray her as a young woman overwhelmed by hostile in-laws, but the documentation of her previous marriages made that narrative impossible to sustain. When she finally took the stand in her own defense, her carefully constructed persona began to crack under Tom's cross-examination. "Ms. Chen, is it your testimony that you simply forgot to mention your 2 previous marriages to your 3rd husband?" I didn't think it was relevant. Those relationships were in the past. "Is it also your testimony that your pregnancy complications were caused by stress from family conflict?" "Yes, the doctors confirmed." "Ms. Chen, I'm going to show you medical records indicating that you were never pregnant during your marriage to my client's son. How do you explain this discrepancy? The courtroom was silent as Sabrina's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, calculation, and finally, cold fury. In that moment, everyone present saw the real woman behind the carefully constructed facade. There must be some mistake. No mistake, Ms. Chen. Just like there was no mistake when you used the same false pregnancy claim during your divorce from Dr. Patterson. Judge Williams called a recess, and when we reconvened, Sabrina's attorney requested permission to withdraw from the case. His client had not been truthful about material facts, making it impossible for him to continue representation. Sabrina was left to face the final phase of proceedings alone, her network of deception finally collapsing around her. The judgment was swift and comprehensive. Sabrina was ordered to pay $75,000 in restitution to Mark for fraudulent representation in marriage, $25,000 to me for emotional distress and legal costs, and faced potential criminal charges for marriage fraud. More importantly, the court voided her lawsuit against me entirely and issued a restraining order preventing her from contacting any member of our family. As we left the courthouse that afternoon, Mark walked beside me with his arm around my shoulders. "Mom, I need you to know something. Everything you did, the house transfer, the financial documentation, even walking out of my wedding, it all saved my life. If you hadn't taken those steps, she would have destroyed me financially and emotionally." "I was just being a mother," I replied, but even as I said it, I knew it wasn't entirely true. I had been something more than a protective parent. I had been a woman fighting for her dignity, her worth, and her right to be treated with respect. 6 months later, Mark helped me plant a new rose garden behind my house. We had used Sabrina's restitution payment to repair the roof, update the kitchen, and finally address years of deferred maintenance. The financial obligations that had once seemed like weapons had been transformed into the foundation for a more honest relationship between mother and son. "I got a call from Dr. Patterson yesterday," Mark told me, as we worked the rich earth between the rose bushes. Sabrina was arrested in Charlotte for attempting the same scheme with a cardiologist. This time, the authorities were ready for her. "Good," I said simply. "Maybe now she won't be able to hurt anyone else." As the sun set over our modest neighborhood, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment of peace. The revolution that had begun with a slap at a wedding reception had evolved into something deeper, a reclamation of worth, dignity, and the unbreakable bonds between mother and child. I learned that sometimes love requires courage, that protecting family means fighting for respect, and that a 66-year-old woman in a torn dress can still change the world when she refuses to accept humiliation as her destiny. To everyone who has followed this story, thank you for your support and encouragement. If this tale of family conflict and ultimate redemption has resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories of ordinary people finding extraordinary strength. Most importantly, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is there. Your global community of support means everything to those of us brave enough to share our truth. Remember, you are never too old, never too powerless, and never too late to stand up for your dignity and demand the respect you deserve. Sometimes the greatest revolutions begin with the smallest acts of defiance, and sometimes the most powerful weapon is simply refusing to accept unacceptable treatment. Thank you for listening, and may you find your own courage when life demands it.